As a practical and functional method of movement in notation studies, it is possible to first determine the rhythmic texture and then act with the gradation method related to the melodic structure. Since studies on how to perceive melodic structures will continue throughout our lessons, it would be appropriate to deal with rhythmic textures first. Let's do exercises on how to detect these patterns in a controlled manner. Read the text you see on the screen at as slow a pace as you were used to. While reading, create the rhythmic figure of the syllables you read by clapping your hands or hitting the table with a pen, corresponding to each syllable. Now let's try.
Merhaba, benim adım Safaye Prem.
Now let's try to parse these expressions according to syllable division with the symbol dot. Let's assign 1 unit, represented by a dot, for syllables ending with a vowel, and assign 2 units, represented by 2 dots, for a syllable ending with a consonant letter. Notice how this unit of time division aligns with the speed of speech.
Merhaba, benim adım Safaye Prem.
First, let's vocalize the single dot symbol that represents the unit of time with a steady rhythmic flow or by tapping the table with a pen.
Merhaba, benim adım Safaye Prem.
After establishing a steady rhythmic perception, when I overlay the text onto it, a picture similar to the previous one emerges.
Merhaba, benim adım Safaye Prem.
Look, when we align this temporal division with musical notes using values such as crotchets, eighths, etc., which we will determine for the unit of time in the next step, an interesting situation arises. Let's consider the unit note as a crotchet. I will sing 1 crotchet per beat.
Merhaba, benim adım Safaye.
Look, it could be any note or in any melodic form. Let's use the example of do notes, for instance.
Do, 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 do.
A note sequence like do-do has been performed. It is possible to modify the created rhythmic texture map by using diminution or augmentation to facilitate readability for the readers. Similarly, in order to enhance the readability of a written transcription, it may sometimes be necessary to do the same. Now, let's consider the diminished version of the previous example. I will sing 1/8 note per unit of time while tapping for each eighth note.
Merhaba, benim adım Safaye Prem.
Let's take a look at its expanded version. The unit note is now 2 beat notes. We will sing it while tapping for each 2 beats.
Merhaba, benim adım Safaye Prem.
Although common perception leads us to believe that the pace of a piece increases when the note values decrease, or slows down when the note values increase, this is not necessarily true. The tempo of a piece is determined by the number of metronome beats per minute corresponding to the note chosen as the unit of time. This can vary. Let's examine these 3 rhythmic versions simultaneously. Look, in the first line, there is a version with quarter notes. In the second line, there is a version with eighth notes as the unit note, diminished version, and in the third line, there is a version with 2 beat notes as the unit note. If the beats for all 3 versions were, let's say, 90 BPM, beats per minute, meaning 90 for the quarter note, 90 for the eighth note in the second example, and 90 for the 2 beat note in the third example, you wouldn't hear any difference in the flow between these 3 lines. The next step will be to determine the note intervals for the melodic line, and I hope that by following our exercises regularly, you will learn how to fulfill this requirement through these videos. Let me try to explain this situation with another example. For instance, let's take the statement randomly as how are the solfege studies going? In English.
Solfej çalışmaları nasıl gidiyor?
The first step is to vocalize this with its own rhythmic texture, considering the syllables while reading it. At this point, let's identify the shortest syllables in these words. Let's examine them. In the phrase solfege çalışmaları nasıl gidiyor?
Ça, ma, la, r, na, gi ve di heceleri.
Let's establish a unit of time for these syllables. Let's use a dot, similar to the previous example, to represent this unit. Now, let's assign values to the other syllables relative to this unit of time and observe how the situation unfolds. Remember the first step we mentioned in the example, creating a symmetrical and steady metronome perception. Then, we try to fit the other syllables into this fixed rhythmic texture based on the shortest syllables. Take a look at the following.
Solfej çalışmaları nasıl gidiyor?
Let's read this together once more.
Solfej çalışmaları nasıl gidiyor?
In the context of free reading flow, we can determine that two-letter syllables ending with vowels correspond to 1 unit of time, represented by a dot, and three-letter syllables ending with consonants correspond to 2 units of time, represented by 2 dots. However, it is important to note that this approach may not work well for elongated syllables or elongation signs in words, as well as for elongated sounds in melodic structures. In such cases, it is necessary to divide the time based on the shortest syllable, represented by 1, and assign the other syllables according to their respective note values. These examples can be varied, and you can also attempt to transcribe any spoken expression into notation using the mentioned method. Measure numbers and time signatures are not included in this type of notation study. If they are included, the strong and weak beats required by the specific time signature should also be taken into account. It is important to preserve the natural emphasis forms found in the text, words, when reading such texts. Similar practices can be applied to various types of speech texts and freestyle music forms as exercises. Once the rhythmic texture is clearly established, successful transcription studies can be carried out by combining these values with the melodic line, including modal and melodic ascending and descending movements. In summary, for a good transcription, it is important to consider the following points. 1. Determine the modal structure of the sung work. 2. Accurately identify the mentioned scales. 3. Determine the range, including the highest and lowest pitches. 4. When noting down the music, establish the shortest timed note unit based on the aforementioned style. 5. Avoid using measure numbers or similar references for free and irregular structures. 6. Do not use bar lines for works performed with a free and irregular style. 7. If possible, notate the original melodic line based on the actual performance, then break it down and rewrite it using the Mock'em system. This step is crucial for the reader to grasp the transposition idea correctly. 8. If applicable, separately identify and document the variations that differ between performances. These differences can be indicated at the end of the page or text, either using an alternative staff on the same note or through footnotes. This approach is important to acknowledge the legitimate melodic variations performed by different artists for specific parts in freely performed works. 9. Pay attention to the clef used during transcription. If performances are based on male vocals and utilize the G clef, it is preferable to use ottava alta or ottava bassa, 8VA, 8VB, or directly employ the F clef. Good luck with your transcription endeavors.